Today we're going to be talking about natural disasters. I'm going to infuse some strategies for reading as well as some social studies content. So if I can have your utmost attention, that would be great. Brian? Reading's not a spectator sport. Reading requires active participation. If I predict, I try to figure out what information will come next and how the selection might end. Natural disasters such as earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, and droughts spring to mind when the word disaster is mentioned. But a disaster should not be defined on the basis of its human consequences, not on the phenomenon that it was caused. An earthquake, for example, is simply an event in nature. Even a very strong one is not a disaster unless it causes injury or destroys property. Thus, an earthquake occurring in an uninhabited area, as do scores of major tremors each month, is only a scientific test of interest and not considered a disaster. Natural hazards. You guys, let's think about it in disasters. Predict. What do you think the rest of the text will be about? So can somebody tell me what they think it may or may not be about? Aisha. What would it be about?
Natural disasters. It would be about what it explaining about what is going on in natural disasters.
Yes, and I agree. Brian, next slide. So my prediction would concur. Visualize, and this is a great strategy to use as well. When you visualize, you guys, you see the images in your mind. You're going to describe what the author uses. And it's going to provide details for the text to create a visual. So right now, everybody should be visualizing in their mind tremors, earthquakes, natural disasters, etc. Next slide. When a natural event does affect a human settlement, the result may not be a major disaster. Consider the earthquake that struck San Fernando, California in 1971. The quake registered a 6.4 on the Richter scale. Yet the region of the San Fernando Valley, with a population of over 7 million, suffered only minor damage and 58 deaths. 2 years later, though, an earthquake of a magnitude of 6.2 struck Managua, Nicaragua, and reduced the center of the city to rubble, killing an estimated of 6,000 people. Visualize. What in your mind do you think the center of Managua looked like?
Destroyed.
Summarize, explain what you've read, and we're going to further clarify. So let's think about what we've read. Can somebody give me their version of what we've read? Somebody I've not heard from. Brian.
We read about tornadoes and how it can be like disasters.
Okay. And give me a little further clarity on what we just read. Chance? A little bit more.
We read about all the natural disasters. We read about all the natural disasters and how sometimes they help and sometimes they can be damage.
Absolutely. What are some strategies I can utilize? A disaster can be more precisely defined as an occurrence of widespread severe damage, injury, or loss of life and property with which a community cannot cope and during which the society undergoes severe disruption. So I want to make that really clear, you guys. Disaster engulfs and encompasses exactly what we're saying here. Widespread severe damage. Next slide. So we're going to clarify in our own words. Once again, we could say it's more of an occurrence that affects people. We have serious issues going on, and it's a severe disruption. Next slide. Connecting, and this is something I ask you guys generally to do a lot. You got to connect personally with what you're reading, whether it be fiction or nonfiction. I would say nonfiction is even easier to connect to. You got to think of similarities between the descriptions of what you have personally experienced, seen, heard, or read. Text to self, text to text, text to real world. While some developed nations may be prone to disasters as poor nations, the people of wealthier nations are not as vulnerable to disasters. They do not die in large numbers, nor does their environment collapse as easily. Both Tokyo, Japan, and Managua, Nicaragua, they're both prone to earthquakes, but the people of Tokyo are far less vulnerable to injury by earthquake because Tokyo has strictly enforced building codes, zoning regulations, and earthquake training and communication systems. In Managua, there's still many people living in top-heavy mud houses on hillsides. Clearly, they're going to be more vulnerable. So, if you guys can connect to that and think about that, it says what natural disaster community is most vulnerable to and why. So, if I'm in a developing country or developed, who's more likely to have a issue, developing or developed?
Developing.
I'm sorry, let's raise hands and let's answer it correctly. Developing or develop? Not develop, someone else. Developing. And let's add a little more clarity in it. It's developing because they're not further along. They don't have the precautions put in place. The structures are not built as solidly, and that's something we really need to look at. Next slide. Form opinions about what you've read. So at this point, we're going to form opinions along the way. We're going to pause and we're going to stop for right here. Thank you, Tia.